Yeah. Back in the end though with my boy Seven. See Mitch. They call me Shmiggy Boss. This shit. Stay tuned. Seven Rock Beats. Seven Rock Bandcamp. Description.
Human beings need bitter with the sweet bitter, with the sweet bitter, with the sweet bitter, with the sweet
Yeah. Back in the end though with my boy Seven. See Mitch. They call me Shmiggy Boss. This shit.
To obscure the real agenda. The real
Human beings need bitter with the sweet bitter, with the sweet bitter, with the sweet bitter, with the sweet bitter.
Yeah. Back in the end though with my boy Seven. See Mitch. They call me Mickey Mouse. This shit. Yeah.
We graduated and went back, and then that day everybody came and got picked up and on big bus to death. He didn't punch me. It was the only time ever. Their friends and their lives. And in fact, they endured the unendurable. They did this not for greed or jealousy or hatred.
Our listeners, really quickly, to get a sense of what you went through, excerpts from your testimony at Winter Soldier.
My name is
All right. Looks like we're doing a solo show tonight, but that's all right. I got some allergies anyway, but I got some big shit to talk about. Pardon my French. Thank you for joining, Facebook folks. Coming on, and for the person that's on YouTube, remember, out of the billions of stars in the universe, you are the one casting light here on the void. That's right. This is a fellowship of brothers and sisters to figure out what the fuck is going on in this motherfucker. This shit is crazy. Can we agree on that? Can I get an amen? I'm just saying. As always, we got some rock beats in the background. Song is WLE. The link is in the description for the Sub Rock Band camp. You can check out some of the beats that he has created. Very prolific producer and a very good friend of mine. He introduced me to a whole world of music. Crazy. First time I ever freestyled was because of Seppi. Introduced me to the idea of participating in world of hip hop. How crazy is that? One person can influence another person in such a way. Don't forget that you could be influencing someone else and changing their lives entirely. But yeah,
Back
that's
in the
separate
end, though, with
reason.
my
Let
boy
it run
Seth.
just a second.
See Mitch.
Get this camera going. Pardon me for having some allergies today, but that's okay. I'm sort of going to ride on the shoulders of some other folks today and introduce you into some topics. Other people have already produced some videos. Look, I'm scrounging and hustling. If you don't work, you don't eat. You know what I mean? So I've been out there working because I got to be eating, meaning I got to pay my mortgage just like everyone else. Got to pay their rent, got to pay their mortgage. Got to keep this roof over their head. Man, I'll tell you, my sinuses have been killing me. I was talking to a good friend of mine today. I was saying, man, you know, because I work on cars, I fix houses, I do all sorts of stuff, right? Repair stuff. I'm like, man, if I could just like zap out my nose with like a impact gun or something, like. Now, people with allergies feel me on that. I know they feel me. They wish they could take that shit out, replace it with like a RoboCop fucking nose. Or like, I don't know, whatever ailment you got. And shit, you got a bum arm. You wish you could get the bionic arm, carbon fiber, blah, blah, blah. You know, titanium, adamantium. Is that even real adamantium? Welcome to the Void. Yeah, tonight, it's been sort of a kooky night. I've had some technical difficulties and I've got some physical difficulties. So, I mean, it's just like crazy. But I do want to talk about some pretty big shit. It's pretty deep. I mean, all wars are bankers' wars. What does that mean? Crazy, right? You would think like if we're at war, we're at war for a reason, right? To like sacrifice our brothers and sisters, our money, our taxation, all of these things. We're going to be at war for a reason that's like, I don't know, valid. Like we're defending our country, defending our allies, things like that. But you know, through history, we know that major rulers in charge of massive power, they find ways to strengthen and multiply on their strength, right? So in the, you know, Genghis Khan might have been able to conquer, you know, China, etc. Or, I mean, I'm not really adept with or astute on the, you know, inner workings of Chinese history. I'm just giving an example of people were conquering other cultures, and people, a lot of times I hear people talk about that as being human nature. But what we forget is how many of the peasants, how many of the people that are just trying to make a living, have some children, maybe smoke a little bit of whatever they want to smoke, drink a little bit of whatever they want to drink, and they just want to have some kids and then die. You know, they're just chilling. They're just trying to make a living, right, on this earth. And most people aren't out to capture or basically take over or rule over somebody else, right? But yet we look through history and then we say it's human nature that we conquer, that it's human nature that we dominate each other and fight each other. But in fact, it's really the nature of the leadership of whoever finds themselves as leader. And if we look at documentaries and research such as I Am Fishhead, which I've mentioned a couple times, I Am Fishhead, topdocumentaryfilms.com, talks about, especially in corporate leadership, but in leadership in general, that you tend to see prevalence of people on the scale of psychopathy. So psychopath isn't like this binary thing, either you're psychopath or not psychopath. There's a whole scale, like a whole spectrum, supposedly. I mean, science is a continual effort. Now, if you want to prove them wrong, become part of science and go through the process of critiquing the findings. But right now, people are talking about psychopathy being on a spectrum. So some of us, you know, have limited empathy. One of the things that goes along with psychopathy is whether or not you empathize. Can you see, or can you feel in a way, can you relate to what someone else is going through? Sometimes you can only sympathize because you've never been able to go through that, and even in your imagination, it's not going to be strong enough to actually really understand what they're going through. And some people don't like that idea that they can't understand what someone else is going through. And so they just assume what they think is right is what it is. That's when you get gaslighting. So we'll talk about that later. But that's a sign of psychopathy, through the manipulation of gaslighting. What is gaslighting? That's an interesting term there. It's actually, gaslighting comes from I believe a Broadway play. And I think it was Gaslight is the name of the play. And in the play, there was a couple. Someone who knows more about this can enter the live chat, or you can Skype. There's a link in the description. Again, pardon my allergies today. I wish I could change out my face right now. All right. But let's look at the definition of gaslight, because some people probably heard this term gaslight. And maybe you know what it is, maybe you don't. If you know what it is, then share it with your brothers and sisters. If you don't know what it is, here you go, gaslight. It's a verb. And I'm pretty sure it's based on a Broadway play, probably adapted eventually into a movie. I can't remember. Someone else can chime in on that. Or look it up if you want. Verify it. Verb, gerund, or present participle. Putting emphasis on the wrong syllable there. All right. Manipulate somebody, right? You're manipulating somebody by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. Quote unquote, or quote, in the first episode, Karen Valentine is being gaslighted by her husband, unquote. So this is something where, like, you see this in abusive relationships where the abused claims their abuse and testifies to their abuse, and the abuser tells them that this isn't happening before their eyes, or tells them that this isn't reality, or they're making it up, or that never happened, etc., and denies the existence of the condition. That's gaslighting. To the point where you question your own sanity. Did this really happen? Now, if you've been through that relationship, know that you have been through a manipulative relationship, because that's what a gaslight is doing, is trying to manipulate your thoughts and your mind into not believing what you see with your own eyes or experience with your own senses, is to say that this isn't happening. So various means are deployed to gaslight the public. So a lot of times people talk about being, feeling a disturbing idea that they don't have any power, that somehow they're being manipulated. But if you were to say it, anyone in authority would say, no, that's not happening. No, you just got it wrong. In a way, sometimes you wonder, because they're in a position of authority, we give them some kind of reverence, right, and respect. And so we assume, because they're in a position of authority, that they know something we don't know. They're privy to this that we don't know, and we trust their, whatever their voice tells us. And therein lies sort of a problem, because can we trust the people that are in power, and how did they get there? If we were to look at the revelations through I Am Fishhead, why is it called I Am Fishhead? The saying is that the fish, I hope you guys can't hear my dogs, but I don't know why they're going crazy. Dogs, it doesn't make sense to me sometimes why they do what they do. But anyway, I Am Fishhead. Why is it called I Am Fishhead? Well, because the saying is the fish rots from the head. And so whatever it is, this organization, it's rotten from the head down. And describes the idea that psychopaths, because of their ability to manipulate and their zest for power, will find themselves in and seek the positions of power, the vectors of power by which they can yield the ability to manipulate others to their end, right? So, can we define the mass of humanity by the leadership that ascends to power because the mechanisms therein allow it to be manipulated thusly that the psychopath can find their way to corporate power, to monetary power, to political power? That is a fear, I believe, that we know that there's psychopaths in our midst. We know that the psychopath seeks power, and therefore a lot of us don't trust power, and rightly so. But how do we prevent that? And I think that's where the problem becomes. The problem is that this sort of catch-22, that in our zeal to provide for our families and enrich our families and ourselves and provide a legacy, we miss the forest of corruption that's in our midst. We stopped looking at the vectors of power for government. We look at government as a separate entity instead of being a participatory process, which it was supposed to be, supposedly. But there's a lot of shit that really we have to think about again. We have to look at the things that we were taught, the things that we know, and wonder, is there an alternative where someone else makes a lot of money? It's that simple. If there's a way for some motherfucker to make a lot of money, they're going to find a way to do that, or power, or resource, basically money. And the more they can get, the more crazy this scheme can become. So when we talk about all bankers' wars, we're talking about people who are in charge and in fact in power to the point where they are the ones creating money. So you're out there fighting for dollars and scratching for dollars, trying to get them more and more, trying to scratch. Some of us scratch a little harder. Some of us scratch in the right spot, and they get all this money. And some of us scratch, and they just, it's like scratching on rocks and nothing's coming out. And if you don't switch up, right, then you perish trying to scratch at these rocks. But other people, because of heritage, because of the mechanisms of power, are able to simply create the thing that everyone else has to fight for. And if you had that power, would you ever want to give it up? What would you do to keep that power? If you had the power to basically issue all the money you wanted, what would you do? If you had unlimited wealth, basically, what would you do? Would you do good? Would you do bad? Would you perpetuate a system by which you could grow your wealth? I mean, a lot of us have different answers because we're all different. But think about the ascension to power and those who want to retain power. If we are to learn the lessons of history, and if we are to trust the collected results of the research done in the documentary I Am Fishhead. And there's other, I mean, it's based on, there's a citation list and bibliography type thing, or you can verify the research that was done for the show. But it's a nice compact package where you can really understand where they're trying to go with that. But anyway, let's talk about, in a recent episode, we were talking about, Superfan Chris mentioned the idea of, or the topic of the monster from Jekyll Island. And that's about the creation of the Fed. And it's a pretty I don't want to say complex, but it's a sort of, it's a convoluted tale. And some of us might not be ready just yet for that. And, but I do want to talk about something relating to the Fed and relating to the idea that all wars are bankers' wars. So Genghis Khan might have conquered with the horse and the spear and the whatever else, sword, right? But after the era of brute force accumulation came the era of currency and money manipulation, in which we create a non-aggression situation where might doesn't equal the ability to smite the other. Might equals the ability to control the other's means of finance based on a set of rules that we've supposedly agreed to or were basically born into. And deviance from that set of rules is met by force by those who also are bound by this set of rules for their existence. So in other words, soldiers, for instance, when they sign up to be part of the military, they are now basically linking their existence to the ability to serve in whatever the government decides that they need to do, right? There's arguments about like whether we should institute the draft, because if you're not a willing participant, let's say you raise your hand to become part of the military, you might not give any critical thought to the orders that you're given. If you're forced to go and you're against the idea of war and you're against the idea of whatever we're doing, then you will come back with an honest perspective. Because if you didn't choose to go, because a lot of times people don't want to face the fact that they might have made a mistake in their decision, they would rather lie in the back end to protect the front end of saying that, yeah, at the time I felt like this was right based on what I heard or felt or saw. This is what I thought was right. Instead of giving that amount of truth, they would rather lie and make up a reason why it was okay this happened or that happened. Now, some people that didn't want to go in the first place will come back with the clarity to say, because they don't have anything to protect. I didn't want to go in the first place. This is what I saw. This is bullshit. Blah, blah, blah. There's a level of honesty that's built in. So now I'm not saying that someone who volunteers to become part of this apparatus can't stop and move on and change. And in fact, I'm going to introduce you to a little piece of that. But first, I want to talk about the idea that all wars are bankers' wars. Now, I have in the comment or in the description, I will have the link to this video. I'm sort of borrowing. You guys see some Obama picture. I don't really know what the political affiliation of this guy is 100%. There's a little bit of oh, look at that. I missed some comments. All right, let me jump into the comments here on YouTube. Thank you for the 3 people that are joining super fans. Think for myself. And I don't know if that's an ironic picture of Obama or if that's a real picture. I don't trust Obama. I think he was a puppet president, just like pretty much all the presidents, except for a few, maybe. But before I play this video, there's a couple things I want you to think about. First of all, research this if you want. You should go ahead and do it. It's going to spout a whole bunch of shit really fast. And now I've already heard and researched some of these things independently through other sources. And most of this seems pretty much true. Now, there's some stuff about global warming and this and that, where, like, look, I don't know 100% if the scientists are right, if they're paid by someone else. I don't know. You tell me. But it makes sense to me that you can't, if you believe in the butterfly effect, right? What's a butterfly effect? You're taking in chaos, taking into effect the effect of chaos, right? Chaos theory. That some positive interference in the right place at the right time could turn, for instance, the wing beat of a butterfly into a typhoon in Japan, or the wing flap of a heron turns into a hurricane in Florida, right? Because one action applies to another through chaos, through things we can't 100% predict. So, for instance, stuff like pachinko, if you're familiar with a pachinko machine, it's a Japanese sort of gambling game where hold on, if I'm going to talk about this, let me just turn back to the camera. But it's where it's almost like pinball, and people turn the dial for the pachinko machine to the point where they can try to get average a lot of the pachinko balls to fall through this maze of little, not really maze, but a matrix of little pegs in which chaos theory is sort of put at play, because you can't really predict 100%. Once the same size ball, the same size amount of force, all of these things are supposedly constant and you can manipulate it, yet the ball, you can't 100% predict where the steel ball will go. If it hits a certain peg, will it go left or right? It's not 100% predictable. So chaos is built in, right? And so the idea of chaos theory would be like, if you tilt a system at all in one way or another, how do you know what the ramifications are down the road? Could your wing beat turn into a hurricane 1,000 miles away? In other words, what you do now in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the ramifications be beyond our scope? Like, for instance, possibly global warming, right? How long can we decide to spew out stuff? Whether you believe, quote unquote, believe in global warming, it's just like, do you believe that if you were to close your garage, turn your car on, and go to sleep, is that okay? Even though I can't see anything happening, right? We are told that, you will succumb to carbon monoxide poisoning, and or the oxygen in the area would be consumed by the internal combustion process of the engine, right? Because it takes oxygen to react with the hydrocarbons to create water and carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, oxides of nitrogen. All sorts of shit happens in the combustion process. And so if just because you could run your car for a while, would you keep running it? How long would you test it? Until you started feeling sick? Until what? Until the carbon monoxide or the lack of oxygen built up to what? Because you can't see or perceive it necessarily, right? Especially if you have a good catalytic converter, or if you have some other things where it sort of takes the smells out, takes some of the toxins out, and yet we would never do that because we sort of understand. We are burning something like hydrocarbons. We are emitting carbon back into the air that was consumed, right? Where did it come from? Where did hydrocarbons come from? It came from oil. Where did oil come from? Supposedly, right? Supposedly it's part of the process of decay of natural matter, right? What is natural matter, really? It all starts from plants, right? Plants are able to take carbon dioxide from the air, and through photosynthesis, through the sun's energy, are able to combine this carbon from the air, right, and the nutrients from their roots to create a physical plant, basically from the air, from taking carbon out of the air, because the plant is made of carbon. Where did the carbon come from? It came from carbon dioxide, right? We know plants take in carbon dioxide. So the idea that the fact that this thing that we can't see, the carbon in the air,
gets assimilated into a physical form into plants, right? Those plants either get eaten by animals or decay, right? Those animals either decay or the plant that it becomes decays and eventually becomes oil in the right conditions. Right. So in essence, what we're doing is we're taking the carbon that was absorbed from the air and was placed into the plants and placed into the animals. This is describing the carbon cycle, which is similar to the water cycle. People understand the water cycle of water evaporating, becoming clouds, becoming rain, coming back down, evaporating, becoming clouds, becoming rain, raining back down. That the same water you drank could have been shit or pissed out of a dinosaur a billion years ago or some shit, right? That maybe not a billion, maybe I don't know the time scales. I'll be honest with you, I always forget, but long time ago. So the idea of carbon is the same way. So as we burn carbon, we are taking the carbon that was sequestered from the air by living beings, right? Plants, and then later those plants get consumed and basically condensed into animals, which then decay and become eventually part of this whole shit of oil, right? Under the right conditions. And so, and plankton and stuff like that, all of that, life in general decays, and it's made of carbon because plants are able, it all starts with the sun, number one. It starts with the sun, the energy from the sun. It wouldn't happen without the energy of the sun. Being used by plants. Without plants, no other life could exist because all other life depends on plants, no matter how you look at it. So we are all part of that. So by burning hydrocarbons and burning fossil fuels, why do they call it fossil fuels? It's made of old ash, fucking decayed ass shit, including bogs, peat, moss, whatever living shit eventually dies and becomes oil. And we can break down the components of life, right, that was once life, break that down and extract the energy from that. And in doing so, we release the carbon that was once sequestered by life, right? And if we put too much, the sun's rays, just like on Venus, the sun's rays keep bouncing back, right? As if it's glass. If we keep dumping more and more and more of the shit, right? Eventually, the chaos theory would say that you have now tilted something beyond your knowledge that we can't predict at all, right? So, and in fact, we can't predict the economy, and that's fucking made of us. We are the economy. All right, let me get to the comments. I've just been rambling like a motherfucker. All right, here we go. Mike says, what's up, James? What's up, Mike? Thanks for tuning in. Chris says, what's up, guys? A little late. Hey, look, whatever, I was late. And I had so many computer problems. Hey, if you got a computer you want to donate, I know there's only 3 people here. Hook it up. The boy needs a new computer. But it had some technical difficulties, so we didn't start till late anyway. DJ, thank you for joining. Superfan DJ, what's up? OG of the Boyd. DJ says another definition for gaslighting should be mind fuck. Yeah, like someone's just fucking with you. You know, they're just not in a good way. Like I'm not that they fucks with you, but that they're fucking with you. Like they're just mind fucking you to some degree, right? It's just manipulation when someone's been clearly manipulating you. But it's not so clear to the manipulated. That's the odd part. And I don't know, you know, y'all probably know more about exactly what causes that than I do. But anyway, let's see what else we got. DJ says, you sure don't want to check if someone breaking into your house, dogs barking. You know what? I ain't got shit for them to take anyway. Whatever. And if they broke in, I would be like, yo, come on the board. Let's talk. What is motivating you to do this? It's the system, isn't it? Let's talk about it. Join the rebel army. All right. Mike Costa says, LOL. All right, DJ Fortes, America superpower, the mighty dollar. I said before other countries overseas call us devils and bullies. Yeah. We make sure our mighty dollar stands strong by all means. DJ is seeing something that a lot of people don't see. DJ, some Christians believe the earth is 5,000 years old. Sailor Panel. Yeah, there is. There's a whole, there's a dude, I think he's in Kentucky, I believe. I don't remember. God. Yeah, he's got a whole, like, he built the Noah's Ark. He's got a whole museum to creation and quote unquote evidence that the world is 6,000 years old or something like that. I don't know. Mike said, it's way older than 5,000 years. Yes, for 100% sure. Maybe humans have evolved for 5,000 years. Even then, I mean, if you look at archaeologists, the more we dig, the more we find. Now, it's something to remember. Now, Stephen Jay Gould, rest in peace. He died a while back, but great book. I would recommend The Panda's Thumb. It's about evolutionary biology, and it's sort of a critique on creation theory, because an almighty, omniscient, omnipotent being, meaning omniscient, what does that mean? All-knowing. Omnipotent, what does that mean? All-powerful, right? Omnipresent, what does that mean? Everywhere at once, right? All of these attributes to a god, yet how come the panda has a 6 digit that's made out of some other bones that everything else has? Humans have it. Every other mammal has basically the same bone in their hand structure, paw, or whatever. It's manipulated in one way or another over time, as it seems. Why would the omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, everything superpower being use an old junkyard parts bin of existing bones to create a 6 digit? Why wouldn't they just create a 6 digit? Bam! You created the 5. Why don't you just create a 6? Because evolution created that over time. The idea isn't that humans came from monkeys or something like that. That's like an oversimplified propaganda crap. Okay. What really happened is things sort of grew. Some shit. It's all about, remember, who has the most babies. Some babies lasted longer and they had more babies. And then some failed and just didn't have babies ever again. And now they're gone, right? And the ones that kept going, the babies that were different, that were favored for whatever reason, either the female picked them or the male forced it, or it was blind luck, like sardines. I'm pretty sure they all look the same, right? They're all under the same pressure, mad pressure, crazy pressure out in the ocean. And they sort of just like, a female squirts some eggs in the ocean and the male squirts some sperm out in the ocean, and they sort of like meet up. And now you got all these little fucking baby sardines and that type of shoaling kind of schooling fish. And there's billions of these little babies. And what do? Most of them get eaten. And then eventually a few hundred pop out and they shoal together and they become a school, or maybe they meet others or whatever. They sort of drift around in the ocean until they can coalesce into a thing. And that's their strategy. And the idea is that it's not even about you. It's not even about your kids. It's about your genes, right? There's Richard Dawkins, whether you agree with the other political shit about him, he came up with the premise of the selfish gene. In fact, he wrote a book titled The Selfish Gene. And in it, he basically describes the notion that the fact that you exist is an adaptation of your genetic code to perpetuate the genetic code. You are sort of a vessel for your genetic code to propagate itself, if that makes any sense. So are all animals, virus, everything. Like virus is basically an encapsulation of genetic material that can replicate itself. And its goal is to retain the code of the gene. I don't know what that means. What's driving the gene to protect itself or perpetuate itself? The fact that you are able to mate and perpetuate the genetic lineage is in of itself the selfish gene, the gene information. And you're just a shell that's created by that information in order for the information to pass through time and fight entropy, right? What is entropy? It is the basically the tendency for all things to break down to its simplest form. That's why things eventually decay and fall apart into the simplest possible form. And that is entropy. We all are trying to fight that. In life, something that sort of signifies life versus non-life is this ability to fight entropy, to fight this breakdown. Like your body's constantly breaking down, but it's also constantly rebuilding as long as what? You're alive. Once you stop being alive, then you can't keep rebuilding that process. Same with vegetables, same with anything else on this earth. And in fact, the fact that we share DNA structures that are even like us, we have stuff that's less complex than fungus, less complex than some plant material or plant life, because they're so ancient. And we are relatively new in the creation of genetic information. And things like fungus and plants that have, especially ancient style plants like mosses and ferns, have very complex DNA because they've been here for so long and able to amass that information. All right, so let's see what's going on in the comments. Bada bing, bada boom. All right, thank you for joining YouTube, and thank you for joining Facebook. Be sure to comment live on what we're talking about. Join the conversation because there's some real shit going down. All right, so let's see what we got. Chris says, I think all the dates are overstated by scientists, quote unquote. Oh, sure. DJ Forte says, Chris, I agree with you. Come over to my side where you question everything. It's good to question everything. What's wrong with that? DJ says, I believe in evolution, but not when it contradicts the Bible. Oh, well. She says, yes, Mr. Boyd, I don't believe that we evolved from apes. Yeah, it's not that we evolved from apes. It's that we have a common ancestor. Way, way, way back, before monkeys, before all of that. There was something that sort of begot, that came first, that eventually it didn't have babies anymore. Something happened, it couldn't stay around. Otherwise, it'd still be here. But from that, a population might have moved over here, or some pressure favored something over here. And now you have different forms of pressures that cause changes in who has the most babies. Basically, who has the most babies. And my theory is, and I'm sure that it's echoed other places, that if you're under less pressure, then the female has more choice. But if you're under higher pressure, then the males, through either physical dominance from having to fight off for resources, will make the choice of mate to perpetuate the lineage, and it will favor that style of dominance or that style of governance within the structure of that society. Each animal has its ways and habits, almost like a culture, right? Why does a peacock walk around with its train out and making weird noises? It's because it's trying to attract the peahen, and that's just part of what it does. You know, why does a peahen even give a shit about that? It's just what they fucking do. We sort of do the same thing in our way, but it's different, right? Lions do something different. Hyenas do something different. Hyenas are matriarchal society. They are. Ryan on Facebook says me love ferns. Indeed, I like ferns too. I think they're pretty interesting. But like hyenas are a matriarchal society. In fact, the female. Okay, here we go. Children, cover your ears. But the female clitoris in the hyena is enlarged, almost like a pseudo penis. Crazy, and they become the dominant within the society, and so that's how their societies run. There's naked mole rats in which they almost behave more like bees than mammals, where the female, there'll be a queen female that sort of expresses a hormone, I think in her urine, that causes the other females to be sterile, and they become subservient to her. And then you have these drone kind males as workers, and it's crazy shit. Every animal has its own way of working. It's crazy if we really look at natural history. All right. Let's see. Chris says, I'm right there with DJ. Like, to me, when people talk about the Bible, I'm like, well, okay, have you considered every other religion first? Or are you just considering religions you're exposed to? And then they're like, well, if I did study every religion and I still came to this, like, well, okay, but at the same point, not everyone comes to the same conclusions that religion comes to. So the Bible itself is something that exists, but a lot of times my challenge to those who are beholden to Scripture is, what is the true reason why you believe in Scripture, and what is it that you believe the Scripture will do for you, and why do you think it's right? And if it's only to serve the purpose of your own salvation, are you truly doing the Word of God? Right? These kind of questions challenge a lot of the devout. And I'm not trying to shake them from the religion, but I'm trying to have them question the true reason why they believe what they believe. And a lot of times, again, people don't want to look at the decisions that they've made in the past and reconcile that initially. And some people, they feel something. I've heard of it like it talked about, like a warm hug or some kind of spiritual presence. Hey, I haven't felt that, as I've expressed in previous episodes. The most I've felt to that degree is by having conversations with religious people to fundamentally have them understand whether or not they are purposely self-driven in their salvation, or if they are selfless in their salvation. Because me, who is not of any special religion, try to be as selfless in my devotion to myself and others, because I see myself in my brothers and sisters, and as they succeed, I feel like I will succeed. If they felt that way, I would succeed. As they fail, I fail, and so it's my job to help them as much as they are willing to help themselves to do that. And that's a crazy concept to some people. Some people, they literally say selfishness is a virtue, and that what I'm saying is dangerous and will destroy democracy and shit like that. They're crazy to me. All right. Here I can't believe we've been talking for an hour almost. I've got some shit to show you, and I haven't even shown it. All right, I'm just rambling. All right, here we go. Chris, agreed. If we evolved from apes, my question has always been, why can't ape and human, male, female, have a baby? Yeah, because we didn't evolve from apes. If you look up cladistics, it's less of a chain of one begets another. It's more like a bouquet, right? And sometimes some flowers are still alive, and some have withered away, and some that stay. If there's a common ancestor way back here, this might have been chimpanzees, this might have been lemurs, this might have been marmosets, this might have been the great apes, and this might have been human, right? But it might have started with like Homo habilis or Neanderthal, and they all branched out into something, and some of them died out. And in the end, humans around, gorilla is around, marmoset is around, lemur is around. So these all made it, but other ones didn't make it. The point is that we all have a common ancestor somewhere, way, 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 way in the way back, right? Millions of years ago. Something that isn't necessarily a monkey, isn't necessarily a human, eventually branched off, and that thing died off. It didn't get to have babies anymore. It died off for whatever reason. Then its progeny that did keep going, they were different. Maybe because location, isolation. It causes weird shit when you're inbreeding, when you're doing stuff. It causes mutations. Some of those mutations are good. Some are bad. The bad ones die. The good ones stay. Then, whatever gets to have the most babies at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter if it's fit for the environment in your mind. It's like, do you get to fuck the most? Do you get the most babies? Bam. Do your babies live? Bam. The gene pushes on, right? And the gene evolves. The genome, the information evolves. Little mutations start to happen. And some of those mutations over millions of, we can't comprehend. Can you really comprehend 1 million years? Can you comprehend your own life? Like going back a decade, where were you? Do you even remember? Do you know everything? Can you really look into that and decipher all of it? Now think back 1 million years. How are you going to decipher that? 2 million years, 300 million years, right? We're looking at carbon. We're looking at the half-life of known elements, and we're measuring like when was this created. And somehow, I mean, we can go look at the veracity of radiocarbon dating and other methods if you wanted to, but that gets pretty nerdy. But we're looking at way back. In Stephen Jay Gould, I think he talks about the notion that people wonder, wait, where's the missing link to this or missing link to that? How did it go from here to here? And the question that he asks is, well, have you ever gone hiking? And most people say yes, they've gone hiking. And he asks, well, how many bear skeletons have you found while hiking? And most people say 0, right? Because most people don't run into a full bear skeleton when hiking. And yet bears exist in our contemporary time with us right now, coincidentally with us. And you can't find bear skeletons just laying around. How do you expect to find a 200 million year old skeleton? I mean, you can't even find shit that exists now. And you're trying to talk shit on people who are trying to find shit from 300 million years ago, 200 million years ago, 100 million, 100,000 years ago, right? So you got to think about it in that perspective. There's a reality to what it takes to do the work. If you don't work, you don't eat, right? You got to do the work, just like the flat earthers. If you haven't done as much work as the ancients in Said and Alexandria, then you're not doing the work. You shouldn't get to eat. You don't get to say what you want to say if you don't do the work. And I don't believe they've done the work because everything I've seen does not equate actual work. But all right. Chris says, if they evolve from the same family tree, every living creature after its own kind. Chris says, it's quite obvious all human beings came from one group of people many moons ago. Yeah. We are a shell. I believe that. I think there's some truth to that for sure. What comes to mind? We are energy beings. Mr. Boyd, I think it's Mr. Boyd, right? Yeah, Mr. Boyd. Do you believe people who died and come back to life was outside of their body and see themselves? I've heard about people having out of body experiences, especially when they're close to dying. Hey, I don't know. I think there's a lot that we can't explain. After having an experience with DMT, it really changed my thought of what consciousness is, what it's like, what it means to be a living thing. Like, for instance, if your head was chopped off, or even if your head wasn't chopped off, if you weren't awake and you couldn't see and you had no conscious existence, number one, most people can't even imagine or conceive of themselves not existing, right? Think about that. You can't think about yourself not existing, yet your physical body existing. Imagine that if you, as a human, as a thought process, as whatever you want to call it, your consciousness is no longer existent, yet your body still breathes, still functions, still like you were hooked up to machines that kept you alive, your cells from dying and kept the body moving with nutrients. Are you really alive? What is life truly? And what does it mean to be conscious? Is being living the same as being conscious? Do things like slime mold have consciousness? Does a bacteria have some level of consciousness because it's alive? I don't know. Obviously, animals have consciousness, right? So how does that work? Like, what is it? Maybe it's a frequency we all tune into, and then eventually you could lose that frequency. Now you're unconscious. I don't know. Those are things that I think we need to figure out, and whether or not you could see yourself as a dead person from outside of yourself. That might be part of that energy, part of things that we don't know yet. Maybe the notion that time is, or the truth, like the events of everything that happens or will happen, the things that will happen, in a way, you could think about it as are inevitable and will happen. So the future is already going to happen. We just don't know what it is. But then also the past has happened and the present is happening as constantly. And our perception is always in the past. By the time our brain recognizes anything, by the time you hear my voice, by the time you see what you see and smell what you smell and hear what you hear, all of that, it's already the past. So all of these things coalesce into one truth, right? And I think that's really the end of the day, is what's really happening in the sort of shared reality that we all collide with. All right, DJ says, oh wait, hold on. Oh yeah, DJ Forte says America is 81% Christian. Yeah, because that's sort of a lot of stuff went into that. However, thankfully, the founding fathers put explicit words that the government, through the First Amendment of the Constitution, would not respect any specific religion, including Christianity. Because what if I don't believe or feel any connection to the precepts of Christianity? What if I feel nothing to any religion? Just as a Christian feels no allegiance to Poseidon, I feel no allegiance to anything else. Same way, same feeling. Apply that to me, and you will understand how I feel. However, there could be some other shit out there. I don't know. Whatever. All right, DJ says, what I'm trying to say, Mr. Boyd, is the majority rules. No, come on. You know what? Majority rule allowed slavery. Majority rule allowed, that no women's suffrage. We don't want that. Sometimes we have to think through some things and really just think about whether or not it's the right thing. All right, Chris says, James, that was a great question. Really makes you wonder. Indeed. DJ says, totally the way you think. Can't find a bear. Chris says, can you repeat the person who made the quote about finding the bear skull? I'm pretty sure it's Stephen Jay Gould. If he wasn't the one, then I don't know. It's a great idea or great concept that most of us in our everyday, we see around us birds, we see around us all of these things, yet how many times do you see the skeleton of these things all around us? Surely they're dying all around us, and they're also being born all around us. And you have very limited exposure to these things. And when you start to put pressure on people like paleontologists, archaeologists, all these people, it's like, look, you're trying to look for your keys from 20,000 years ago. You can't even find your keys from yesterday. So it's a tricky business, and if you're not willing to do the work and jump in the dirt, then, maybe you shouldn't be throwing words, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying anyone is. It's just something we got to think about as we look at the world and critically think, right? Chris, who would have thought a conversation about the Fed would lead into evolution? Indeed, the Boyd, as much as I plan for this shit, and if I cue some shit up, man, the Boyd is a fellowship of Americans, of anybody around the world. We had someone from Australia a while back. It doesn't matter. We're just trying to figure out what the hell is real, what the hell is fake, and find our way through the bullshit. All right, let's see. DJ Forte, Google Mike, the headless chicken. It was the chicken that lived without its head. It's documented. Yes, there was one that lived for years. It just had the base component of the brain. I think it was like the amygdala and some other control centers of the brain, but the majority of the head was chopped off, and they fed its throat hole. I mean, I don't know what you want to call it. It's basically an exposed esophagus. Fed it food and kept it alive, and it lived for years with no head. At least one. I mean, there's probably multiple documentary cases of this happening. Is it truly alive? What does it mean to be alive? The fact that it can fight entropy and not decay? It has no brain. You know? I don't fucking know. Mike says I'm not a headless chicken. Sometimes I feel like a headless chicken. DJ Forte, also known as the Miracle Mike. Chicken lived for 18 months without a head. Yeah. Chris says sometimes Mike does run around like a chicken with the head cut off. Just kidding. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy that a chicken lived without its head. It went on tour with no head. How crazy is that shit? Went on tour with no head. All right, let's get back. I mean, we're going to wrap this up in a second, but I want to at least talk about a little bit about, because I want to also introduce the idea that we're being manipulated by who else could make us go to war, right? So if they're making us go to war, what else can they make us do? And they have the money and the means and the power to do it. And I Am Fishhead tells us they're probably psychopaths and they want to keep it at any cost. But let's see, as I lose my voice, let's see what these guys have to say about this. And I'm standing on the shoulders of some other folks, but I think it's entertaining. It goes pretty fast. It talks about global warming as a conspiracy, but I disagree, because how much can we affect the world without expecting that chaos theory will affect us back? We really shouldn't. We should work in harmony with the world as best we can, especially since we're basically fungus. Let's hope that we are smarter than cancer, smarter than fungus, and we don't destroy ourselves from ourselves. That's the idea. And that's what the Void is about, so that we share some shit. All right, so I'm going to show this as my fucking voice escapes me. It's really interesting. There are a couple things I don't agree with. But for the most part, it really illuminates. And again, I want you to look at it with a critical mind. Some of this stuff you'll have to Google. But I've already personally researched this outside, and it just go ahead. It aligns with the research I've done in the past, and also folks that are familiar with the monster from Jekyll Island, I think that's what it's called. The creation of the Fed will also recognize the historic events that occur in this video. All right, so here we go. I'm going to show this video. The link to the video is either in a comment or the description of the YouTube feed that you're watching now. I want to give credit to them because I'm using their video. All right, here we go. All wars are bankers' wars. It's something to think about as you look at the news and things around you that you're being told. This was back in 2015. Okay, this was done back in 2015. This is also like a share of a video from even earlier, and you will see contemporary current events occurring now that were predicted back then, because it is something that is willed by the banks, by the people in power. And so it's not a conspiracy. It's like, just listen to this shit. Watch.
It's a picture of what's been going on behind a lot of the wars, especially since the Napoleonic Wars of the late 1700s through today, that a lot of people may not realize, you may know as I do, having looked into it, that there's something behind what we're really shown by mainstream media and what governments officially come out with that is not known. It's not very well taught because they really don't want us to know, I don't think, who's really behind it. And without the money to fund and finance all this crazy warfare, governments could not do it. They could not tax their citizens, or we'd say, no, we're not going to pay for the war. So they figured out another way to do it. And the bankers are behind it. So anyway, watch the video, draw your own conclusions. I hope you find it entertaining. And let me know what you think in the comments section.
Now, I want to share a story with you, and this is actually an article that I wrote over the weekend called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. And I went in, I did a lot of research. It's posted to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. I understand it's already gone viral. It's being reposted around the web. But I wanted to basically tell it to you here on the radio show. And it's a very long story. We're probably going to take the rest of the hour to do it. But it's something that you need to understand, that all of these wars and assassinations that we're told are crazed lone nut assassins or weapons of mass destruction or bringing democracy, all of them track back to the private central bankers as the initiating event. And the more you study this, the more you will realize all the wars are wars for the bankers, for the private central bankers. And I know a lot of people are going to have difficulty comprehending this, just how many of these wars we have fought as a nation were fought for no other purpose than to force private central banks onto nations that did not want them. So we're going to have a few examples so you understand why at this particular time in history, the United States government is mired in so many wars against so many foreign nations. And there's plenty of precedents for this. Now, going back to the beginning, the United States fought the American Revolution primarily over King George III's Currency Act, which forced the colonists to abandon their own government-issued currencies and conduct business only using printed banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. If you go back to the writings of Ben Franklin, direct quote, the refusal of King George III to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators was probably the prime cause of the revolution. That's Ben Franklin. Now, our public schools don't, because you're not supposed to know that the bankers were really behind the American Revolution. After the Revolution, the United States adopted a revolutionary, radically different economic system in which the government issued its own value-based currency so that private banks couldn't skim the wealth of the people through interest-bearing banknotes. So the American Revolution was fought primarily to free the American people from King George III's Currency Act, which ordered them to conduct all business using printed banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. So the Bank of England was just, raking in wealth from the labor of the American people in exchange for ink and paper. And that fueled the anger that led to the American Revolution. Your public schools don't spend a lot of time on that, but that was really what it was all about. So the revolution was over, the United States was born, but the private bankers are nothing if not dedicated to their schemes to acquire other people's wealth, and they knew full well how easy it is to corrupt a nation's leaders. Now, just 1 year after Mayer Amschel Rothschild had uttered his infamous, "Let me issue and control the nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws," private bankers succeeded in setting up a new private central bank called the First Bank of the United States, largely through the efforts of the Rothschilds' chief supporter in the United States, Alexander Hamilton. Now, this First Bank of the United States was founded in 1791, and by the end of its 20-year charter, the First Bank of the United States had almost ruined the nation's economy while enriching the bank's owners. As a result, Congress refused to renew the charter and signaled their intention to go back to a state-issued value-based currency on which the people paid no interest at all to any banker. This resulted in a threat from Nathan Mayer Rothschild against the U.S. government. Quote, "Either the application for renewal of the charter is granted or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war." End quote. Congress still refused Americans a lesson. Bring them back to colonial status. End quote. Financed by the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England, Britain then launched the 1812 to recolonize the United States and force them back into the slavery of the Bank of England's banknotes. Or to plunge the United States into so much debt, they would be forced to accept a new private central bank. And the plan worked. Even though the United States won the War of 1812, Congress was forced to grant a new charter for yet another private bank issuing the public currency as loans at interest, the second bank of the United States. Once again, private bankers were in control of the nation's money supply and cared not who made the laws or how many.
So realize we have a system where the bank. So you got to think about this. So you guys have heard of treasury notes and the treasury, right? You have, short-term notes and bills, treasury bills and treasury bonds. Treasury bonds are going to be long-term government-backed debt. So they sell off this debt, right? Well, what backs the debt? Well, eventually the Fed will create the money to pay back the debt, right? But meanwhile, during the issuance of the debt, who's paying the interest, right? The American public is paying the interest. And meanwhile, we also are paying interest on the currency that's being issued. So every time they raise the debt ceiling, every time we issue currency, these are things that are growing our debt burden as a society, right, to the banks. And the Federal Reserve is not part of us as a people. It is a private entity, like Publix is a private entity. Even they say, share with their employees. You can have shares. They're more open than the Federal Reserve. Federal Express, the courier company, right, is a private company owned by shareholders and whatever owners. It is the same thing as the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not beholden to the people of the United States. It is not an entity of the federal government. That's the problem. So this is one of the things that, as we see what they're doing with the banks and their machinations, which machinations just means like the like sort of the mechanisms you can imagine, like a machine. Machinations is machine is the I don't know what the exact root word, but it's basically the same root word as machine. So the machinations of capital, of money, of that type of power. I don't care who makes the laws. I care who makes the currency, right? Who controls the money controls the world. And so these people who have found it since the Napoleonic Wars, the idea of I will fund both sides. Whoever wins has to pay the debts of the loser. I get money either way. Go ahead, have at it. I don't give a shit. Just here's some money. Go fight each other, right? Whoever wins, you got to pay both back. Okay, whatever. I just care about winning. Okay, whatever. Here's some money. So as we look at this, we have to think to ourselves, do we think that something's happening because of the goodness of the spirit of the heart of these people? Or do we think that there's a way for them to make money and manipulate the public in doing so? I don't know. You tell me. But I'm pretty sure if it means someone's getting more money, they're going to be doing it, right? So think about that as we see the different shit that we've been fucked up in because of money, right? We already saw Revolutionary War, War of 1812. We're going to talk about the Civil War and move into the fact that wars in general, we're going to come all the way to the contemporary, even into Iran. In earlier than 2015, they're talking about the ideas of going to war with Iran because those people in Iran have oil and they're trying to sell their oil in something other than the dollar, right? And the petrodollar rules the world right now. And if you try to confront the petrodollar with your own, devices, you will see the end the same way Saddam Hussein did, the same way Gaddafi did, the same way they're trying to do with Syria, the same way they're trying to do with Iran, and they're trying to do with Venezuela. So keep that in mind as you take a look at some other things that
British or American soldiers had to die for it. So once again, the nation was plunged into debt, unemployment, poverty by the predations of the private central bank. And in 1832, Andrew Jackson successfully campaigned for his second term as president. The slogan, Jackson and no bank. True to his word, Jackson succeeded in blocking the renewal of the charter for the Second Bank of the United States of America. And this was where that famous quote came from Andrew Jackson. Quote, "Gentlemen, I too have been a close observer of the doings of the Bank of the United States. I have had men watching you for a long time, and I am convinced that you've used the funds of the banks to speculate in the breadstuffs of the country. When you won, you divided the profits amongst you, and when you lost, you charged it to the bank. You tell me that if I take the deposits from the bank and annul the charter, I shall ruin 10,000 families. That may be true, gentlemen, but that is your sin. Should I let you go on, you will ruin 50,000 families, and that would be my sin. You are a den of vipers and thieves. I've determined to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out." End quote. Andrew Jackson. Shortly after the charter for the Second Bank of the United States expired, there was an assassination attempt on Andrew Jackson, and it failed when both pistols used by the assassin, Richard Lawrence, failed to fire. Later on, Lawrence explained the motive for the assassination by saying that with President Jackson dead, money would be more plenty. So it was an assassination motivated by the interests of the bankers. Now, our public school system is as subservient to the bankers' wishes to keep certain history from you, just as the corporate media is subservient to Monsanto's wishes to keep the dangers of GMOs from you. So it should probably be no surprise that the financial, well known to the average American, it's portrayed in our history books and our popular media as an internal dispute over slavery. But in fact, it was a war with global implications. When the Confederacy seceded from the United States, the bankers once again saw the opportunity for a rich harvest of debt and offered to fund Lincoln's efforts to bring the South back into the Union at 30% interest. Lincoln remarked that he would not free the black man by enslaving the white man to the bankers, and using his authority as president, issued a new government currency, the greenback. This was a direct threat to the wealth and power of the central bankers, who quickly responded. This is a quote from the London Times following Lincoln's issuance of the greenbacks. Quote, "If this mischievous financial policy, which has its origin in North America, shall become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous without precedent in the history of the world. The brains and wealth of all countries will go to North America. That country must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe." So, goaded by the private bankers, much of Europe supported the Confederacy against the Union, with the expectation that victory over Lincoln would mean the end of the greenback. France and Britain seriously considered an outright invasion on the United States in support of the Confederacy, but they were held at bay by Russia. A little bit of history most Americans don't understand. Russia came to the aid of Lincoln's Union during this. Now, at that time, Russia had just ended their serfdom system, and they had a state central bank similar to the system the United States had been founded on. Now, free of European intervention, the Union won the war, and Lincoln announced his intention to go on issuing the greenbacks. Following Lincoln's assassination, the greenbacks were pulled from circulation, and the American people forced to go back to an economy based on banknotes borrowed at interest from the private bankers. So finally, in 1913, the private central bankers of Europe, in particular the Rothschilds of Great Britain, the Warburgs of Germany, met with their American financial collaborators on Jekyll Island, Georgia,
They want
to
that
form a
interest.
new banking cartel with the express
Jekyll
purpose of
Island.
forming the third bank of the United States, with the aim of placing complete control of the United States money supply once again under the control of private bankers.
Bam.
Owing to hostility over the previous banks of the United States, the name of this third bank was changed to the Federal Reserve, in order to grant the new bank a quasi-governmental image. But in fact, it is a privately owned bank. It's no more federal than Federal Express. In fact, last year, the Federal Reserve successfully rebuffed a Freedom of Information lawsuit by Bloomberg News on the grounds that as a private banking corporation and not actually a part of the U.S. government, the Freedom of Information Act did not apply to the operators of the Federal Reserve. So 1913 proved to be a transformative year for the nation's economy. First, with Congress' passage of the 16th Income Tax Amendment and the false claim it had been ratified. Here's another direct quote. "I think if you were to go back and try and find and review the ratification for the 16th Amendment, which was the internal revenue, the income tax, I think if you went back and examined that carefully, you would find that a sufficient number of states never ratified that amendment," end quote. That's U.S. District Court Judge James C. Fox in Sullivan versus United States, 2003. Later that same year, 1913, and apparently unwilling to risk another questionable amendment, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act over the Christmas holiday in 1913, while members of Congress opposed to the measure were at home. This was a very underhanded deal, as the Constitution explicitly vests Congress with the authority to issue the public currency, does not authorize its delegation, and thus would have required a new amendment to transfer that authority to a private bank. But pass it, Congress did, and President Woodrow Wilson signed it, as he promised the bankers he would in exchange for generous campaign contributions. Now, President Wilson later regretted that decision. You've probably heard this quote before, but you're going to get it again. Quote, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." That was Woodrow Wilson writing in 1919. Now, 1 year after the passage of the Federal Reserve Act, World War I started. And it is important to remember that prior to the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war. Now, World War I actually started between Austria, Hungary, and Serbia, but quickly shifted to focus on Germany. Why Germany? They didn't start the war. Why was Germany the villain in World War I? Well, the real reason was their industrial capacity was seen as an economic threat to Great Britain. Great Britain's pound was already in decline at the time because too much economic emphasis was already in decline at the time, and not enough because too much economic development, industrial development, and infrastructure. It's very much like the situation we have in the United States right now. All the financial operatives, they want to play the Wall Street games, and other parts of the economy are being neglected. We've lost a great deal of our manufacturing. We're not the agricultural exporter we used to be because everybody's over there at Wall Street playing in that giant open-air casino. Now, pre-war Germany did have a private central bank, but it was under strict control by the German government to keep inflation at reasonable levels and to make sure that all of the German economy was being properly funded, just like Putin did with their central bank about a month ago. Under government control by the German government, investment was guaranteed to internal economic development, and as a result, Germany had become a major manufacturing technological power. They were exporting products that Great Britain could not compete with. So in the media of the day, Germany was portrayed as the main opponent of World War I. And not just defeated, it was flattened. Now, following the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was ordered to pay the war costs of all the participating nations, even though Germany had not started that war. This amounted to 3 times the value of all of Germany itself. Germany's private central bank, to which the German government had gone deeply into debt to pay the cost of the wars, was allowed to break free of government control. That led to the massive inflation of the Weimar Republic, followed, permanently trapping the German people in endless debt. And money speculators were running rampant. And it led to these situations where you had literally a whole basket full of paper notes to get a loaf of bread. Now, when the Weimar Republic collapsed economically, it opened the door for the National Socialists to take power. Their first financial move was to issue their own state currency, which was not borrowed from private central banks. It was based on a unit of value, not a unit of debt. Freed from having to pay interest on the money in circulation, Germany blossomed and quickly began to rebuild its industry. It was an amazing transformation to see. The media called it the German miracle. Time magazine lionized Hitler for the amazing improvement of life for the German people and the explosion of German industry, and they even named him Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1938. And then once again, Germany's prosperity and freedom from a private central bank loaning the public currency at interest became a threat to other nations and other powers. I have a couple of quotes here from Winston Churchill that tells you what was really going through the minds of Europe in the years leading up to World War II. Quote, "Should Germany merchandise again," which means do business, "should Germany merchandise again in the next 50 years, we have led this war, World War I, in vain." That was Winston Churchill writing in the Times in 1919. Another quote, "We will force this war upon Hitler if he wants it or not," end quote. Winston Churchill in a 1936 radio broadcast. Quote, "Germany becomes too powerful. We have to crush it." And Winston Churchill in November 1936, speaking to U.S. General Robert Wood. Quote, "This war is an English war, and its goal is the destruction of Germany." Winston Churchill, autumn 1939 broadcast. So it was all about economics and profitability. Now, Germany's state-issued value-based currency was also a direct threat to the wealth and power of the private central banks around the world. And as early as 1933, they started to organize a global boycott against Germany to strangle this upstart ruler who thought he could run his nation without a private central bank. Now, as had been the case in World War I, Great Britain and other nations threatened by Germany's economic power looked for an excuse to go to war. And as public anger in Germany grew over the boycott, Hitler foolishly gave them that excuse. Years later, in a spirit of candor, the real reasons for the war were made clear. Quote, "The war wasn't only about abolishing fascism, but to conquer sales markets. We could have, if we had intended so, prevented this war from breaking out without doing one shot, but we didn't want to." End quote. Winston Churchill to Harry Truman, March 1946. One more quote here. Quote, "Germany's unforgivable crime before World War II was its attempt to loosen its economy out of the world trade system and to build up an independent exchange system from which the world finance couldn't profit anymore. We butchered the wrong pig." End quote. Winston Churchill writing in his book, The Second World War. Now, a little side note, we're going to actually step back in time to the years before World War II. Little bit of history a lot of Americans are still completely unaware of. And it involves a gentleman by the name of Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler. In 1933, Wall Street bankers and financiers had bankrolled the successful rise to power of Hitler and Mussolini. Brown Brothers Harriman in New York, and they're still there. I saw them when I was there for the 9/11 anniversary. They were financing Hitler right up to the day war was declared with Germany. And these Wall Street financiers decided that a fascist dictatorship in the United States, based on the one Mussolini had in Italy, was going to be far better for their business interests than Roosevelt's New Deal, which threatened massive wealth redistribution to recapitalize the working and middle classes of America. So the Wall Street tycoons recruited General Butler to lead the overthrow of the U.S. government and install a Secretary of General Affairs who would be answerable to Wall Street and not the people, would crush social unrest and shut down all the labor unions. General Butler pretended to go along with the scheme, but then exposed the plot to Congress. So they recruited Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler to lead this coup d'etat, because Butler was very popular with the soldiers, and his image as part of this move would help convince the military this was the right thing to do. Now, to his credit, Major General Smedley Butler, remembering his oath to the Constitution, pretended to go along with the scheme, but then exposed the plot to the United States Congress. Congress, then as now in the pocket of Wall Street bankers, refused to act. When Roosevelt learned of the planned coup, he demanded the arrest of the plotters, but the plotters simply reminded Roosevelt that if any one of them were sent to prison, their friends on Wall Street would deliberately collapse the still fragile U.S. economy and blame Roosevelt for it. So Roosevelt was unable to do anything about this attempted coup d'etat until the start of World War II, at which time he prosecuted many of the plotters under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Now, mostly it was glossed over. Oh, it was just a rumor, unfounded. It's wacko conspiracy theory. But in 1967, the congressional minutes of Smedley Butler's revelation to Congress of the coup were finally released to the public. You ever see this movie, 7 Days in May, Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster, about an attempted military takeover of the United States of America? It was based loosely on this story. But of course, in the movie, the bankers being behind the Burt Lancaster character was completely removed from the script here. Now, Smedley Butler is also famous for writing a work called War is a Racket. And I would like to read you a quote from that. Quote, "I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service as a member of our country's most agile military force, the Marine Corps. I served in all commissioned ranks from second lieutenant to major general. And during that period, I spent more of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I suspected I was just part of a racket at the time. Now I'm sure of it. Like all members of the military profession, I never had an original thought until after I left the service. My mental faculties remained in suspended animation while I obeyed the orders of the higher-ups. This is typical with everyone in the military service. Thus, I helped make Mexico and especially Tampico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1909 through 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. In China in 1927, I helped see to it that the Standard Oil went its way unmolested. During those years, I had, as the boys in the back room would say, a swell racket. I was rewarded with honors, medals, and promotion. Looking back on it, I feel I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was operate his racket in 3 city districts. I operated on 3 continents. General Smedley Butler, former U.S. Marine Corps Commandant, and he wrote that in 1935. So, now moving forward here. As president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy understood the predatory nature of private central banking. He understood why Andrew Jackson fought so hard to end the Second Bank of the United States. So Kennedy wrote and signed Executive Order 11110, which ordered the U.S. Treasury to issue a new public currency called the United States Note. Now, Kennedy's United States notes were not borrowed from the Federal Reserve. They were created by the U.S. government and backed by the silver stockpiles held by the U.S. government.
All right. So, I don't know. It's going on for quite a while. I'm going to take a break. We're going to come back maybe on a Sunday sesh, maybe on a Wednesday. Who knows? Next episode, tune in, tell your friends, subscribe, get connected. So I want to give some thanks and credit to the Handegard. He's just some guy. Really, he found this video. It just sort of encapsulates a lot of what I've independently found. However, if I were you, I would also independently verify these things so that you know what is real or not. You can try to verify it as you want. Neat thing about technology is that you get to pause and rewind at will. So thank you. Thank you all for tuning in. For those of you that are tuning in on the archives, please be sure to try to tune in on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. For the live episodes of The Boyd. You can comment live and be part of the conversation. You can also Skype in if you want. Don't forget. And be on the show if you want. If you want to be a guest, just get in touch with me. Let me know what you want to talk about. And the stage is yours for the folks to listen to and engage with. Hopefully you guys aren't hearing some audio issues. There might be right now. I've been hearing some strange echoes. But remember, the truth can hurt. It's weakness leaving your mind. Remember, the thing to believe in, if you want to believe in anything, the truth is what you should believe in, because there is only one truth, and you are part of it, and you know when you're not telling the truth. So thank you all for joining in. Remember, Patreon, if you want to help support the Boyd, get the word out. I mean, one thing you can do that really helps out is subscribing and telling your friends about the Boyd. And again, remember, this is just a fellowship of people trying to figure this shit out. There's some crazy shit going on, and I think we need to talk about it. If you don't agree with something, talk about it. If you don't agree with something, bring it up. We'll talk about it. If you agree with me, give me a high five, like, subscribe, tell your friends, and don't forget that we have Sep C Beats in the background, and it's the real deal. Sep Rock, Bandcamp in the description. Bandcamp. This has been another episode of The Boyd. Thank you.
Human beings need bitter with the sweet, bitter with the sweet, bitter with the sweet, bitter with the sweet.
Yeah.